Stephen's kind of shooting star career is found in the 6th and 7th chapter of Acts. All we get in the lectionary is the end of the story. And so you always think, okay, I wonder what happened. Why did they kill him? And who was this Stephen guy anyway? So we don't know much about him up to the point that he gets chosen. So there's some complaining going on. The Greek folks didn't think that their widows and others who were in need were being taken care of well, that the local folks who had grown up in Jerusalem, the Jewish community from there, was getting all the food and getting everything. So the Greeks complained, and the big shot apostles said, we don't have time to be taking lunch to Mary over here. Sorry, we've got more important things to do. So we need to appoint somebody to take care of taking food over to Mary. So they choose 7 guys who seem to be good followers of Jesus, who are prayerful people, and said, okay, these 7, you guys are in charge of the distribution of food. That was their job, to make sure that the poor people in their community were getting fed. Now, we don't know what Stephen did. Perhaps when he was bringing a fish sandwich one day to Mary, he touched her and healed her or something. That other things started happening because he was getting noticed. And that getting noticed wasn't a good thing. Because by this point in the church's history, the Jewish leadership wasn't all that in favor of it. Initially, you might recall, like we'll talk about next Sunday with Pentecost, the very first day, they converted 3,000 people. You think, wow, they did great. And then just however long later, we don't know how long, but when Stephen's around, the leadership is not happy. So they bring him in to the Sanhedrin. That Sanhedrin's 70 old guys who are in charge of running the local government and mostly the religion. So they're made up of both Sadducees and Pharisees. Those 70 call Stephen in. Stephen doesn't know why he's been called in. He's just got arrested and brought before the Sanhedrin. What? I took a sandwich to Mary. Yeah, that's what I did wrong. And they trumped up charges against him. They say, well, you are telling people not to follow the rules of our ancestors. You are telling people not to go to the temple to worship. You are breaking all the commandments. You are a troublemaker. Well, this must have gotten Stephen fired up because he gives then a long talk, one of the longest talks that are in the Acts of the Apostles. So he's talking about how the Sanhedrin's ancestors over and over and over again didn't listen to God. He kind of goes through the whole Old Testament and points out every mistake they ever made. Remember that time when they didn't listen? Remember that time when they rebelled? Remember the time they worshiped foreign gods? Remember that time? Remember that time? He goes through that whole list. Well, that doesn't make him very happy. And then he says, and you miss the point that you don't have to go to the temple. You can pray to God anywhere. That's what our ancestors taught. Look at all the occasions where God was working not at the temple. So you insisting that we have to come to the temple are wrong. And then they're getting all kind of fired up and mad at him. So he starts really poking him and says that really they're heart of heart, worthless kind of leaders. So then they're mad. And they decide what we hear today, the penalty. So you are a bad person, and we are going to condemn you to death for these charges that we have brought against you. Even though they had no evidence of any of the things that Stephen did, it was just his response completed their anger. So as you heard, he went from just being a good food server to being the first martyr. And as you heard today in that first reading, in that martyrdom, he gives evidence of what he may have been doing when he was distributing food. And that is, he acted like Jesus, because he forgives them, just as Jesus did on the cross. And he sees Jesus in his encounter, which really makes him mad. I see Jesus coming. No, you don't. We're going to finish you off with some more stones here. But he clearly was a man with a good heart, a man close to God. And because of that, he dies. Now, you would wish that that was an ancient tale, that those kind of things didn't happen anymore. But it is not an ancient tale. And you don't have to go very far from the newspapers to find stories of people who are good, striving to follow Jesus. Maybe their biggest thing they ever do wrong is they bring a fish sandwich to Mary. But that's enough to, even to this day, get themselves killed. One who moves me and who I talk to on a regular basis is a priest from Oklahoma who worked in Guatemala, in a little village of Santiago. And his crime was he taught people to read. That was his crime. And so a death squad came and murdered him. And they had threatened him beforehand to stop doing that. Stop teaching people to read. You're a rebel. You're terrible. So he died for teaching people to read. The church looks at Stanley as a martyr. And we still have all kinds of new martyrs. Not long ago, but today. And so that might be something for each of us as well, as we live out our goodness that Jesus calls us to. We may find ourselves in situations where people don't like what we are doing out of love. But there is, I think, in that first reading today a warning as well. And it's what Jesus prays about in that gospel. Because we hear in that first reading that there was a young man there when Stephen was being killed, and the elders laid their garments at this young man's feet, and his name was Paul. He goes on later to be converted and becomes the great apostle Paul. But I always wonder how it was possible that he could be so bad. And how could the Sanhedrin be so bad? How is that possible that good people do bad things? Those stories in the scripture of when that happens always bother me. And they make me stop and think, okay, don't make such quick judgments. Because that's what they were doing. Their ears were closed to the message. They could not hear Jesus. They condemned Jesus, and then they condemned Stephen. Good people. These were the religious leaders that killed in the name of God. Think, well, does that still happen today? Yes, it still does. All throughout the world, people hurt other people by what they believe is something good, that they are doing something right in their hearts. And so we have to go gentle into our lives and make sure that we are listening to God and not quickly deciding and hurting and condemning anybody else. Jesus, in his prayer today, prays that his disciples would be one, that we'd have some kind of unity, and he prays that we might see who Jesus truly is. But I think part of the Sanhedrin's problem and Paul's problem is that their minds were closed to the truth of what God teaches, of what Jesus teaches. And I know that happens to this very day, that people sit in churches week after week and hear the message, but it doesn't make sense. Just like it didn't make sense to Paul. Paul could not see until the grace of Jesus comes into him and changes his life. And all of us need that on a regular basis. We need Jesus to come in and help us to see where his glory is and where his truth is. So that first reading has both great glory for Stephen and a warning for those who are closed-minded. And we can learn from both.